and a very beautiful town. Riga is the most beautiful town. And before I tell you about my story, I brought up a happy home that gave you a good start, you know. And also, Riga was a very interesting town and lots of sport. Now, which sport do you think was most popular there?
Soccer.
Exactly. Bafana. Already at that time was Bafana. Soccer, everyone crazy about soccer. Today also. Right. We found every time after school we got hold of a ball and looking for a little place where we could kick the ball, you know. So anyway, as I said, it was very close to my mother and my father and my whole family. And then, all of a sudden, all this came to a sudden end. Why? Because the Germans attacked Russia. If you know the part of history, actually the Russians and a limit, but the Germans didn't keep it. And suddenly they attacked Russia, and they were on the way to Riga, because Latvia is not very far. You see, if this is Germany, they went like this, and they were on the way to Riga. So we were in a very great panic. We didn't know what to do. And all the other Jews didn't know what to do, because we heard stories of what's happening to the Jews in Poland, for instance, when the Germans came into Poland in 1939. We already heard rumors that they are killing the Jews, but we didn't believe it was true. So we had only 1 week to make up our mind, either to stay or to run, because we could run away. As you can see, Latvia, there was on the Russian border, so the people that wanted to run away, they could run away.
To Russia.
But you know human nature. You say, how can we run away? How can you leave everything behind? Everybody accumulates things, clothes, whatever. How can you leave everything behind? And here were made the most terrible mistakes. Their clothes or jewelry, whatever, they lost their lives. But you didn't know. You didn't believe it, you didn't expect it. And here, one day, so the week passed, myself and my family, we stayed, and one day, a long time ago, I was 14 years old at that time. But on that day, the Germans entered Riga. And I'm sure you have heard a lot about the Holocaust already. You heard what happened to the Jews and others, not only the Jews, others also. And you saw films and you read books. And here I'm going to tell you exactly what happened to us. They came in on a Tuesday. It was the first day they came in was quiet. Nothing. The second day already, they started with a persecution, with all the laws and everything against the Jews. You know, one thinks about it, why, you know, what was it? The Jews. Why the Jews? We hear so much about oppression and persecution. In South Africa, here, we know all about persecution, right? Not so long ago. But what lots of people don't know, and maybe you there, right? Hi. You don't know that people that white people with blue eyes and blonde hair, and they were also persecuted. They were also persecuted. And here it is. So it started with the Greeks. You were not allowed to mix with the Gentiles. Now, you know what Gentiles are? Gentiles, we call Gentile the Christians, the non-Jewish Christians. We were forbidden to talk to them, to mix with them, to buy from the shops. We were not allowed to walk on the pavement. We had to walk in the gutters. And the worst thing was, you had to wear the stars of David. You know what the Star of David is? Yellow. One here, one at the back. You read down in the gutters, young people, old people, women, children, walking in the gutters with stars of David, like in the Middle Ages. But that wasn't all. The extermination started, the killing started, right from the second day. And how did it happen? You walked in a street. They needed certain numbers every day to be exterminated. So how did they get those numbers? You see you walking in the street, didn't like your face or whatever, took you away. Come here, come here. Then the terrible knock at the door. It could be morning, could be evening. Now you know what knock meant. Death. A knock on the door meant death. Because you open the door and here they were, the police, and they look at you and they say, oh, you come here, come with us, and you come with us, and you come with us. There's no argument. You go with them. Right. Now imagine you're a family of 6 or 7. Today you're 6. Tomorrow you may be 4. A day later you may be 2. You understand how people disappeared. Give you an idea. The terror. They adopted such a terror against the Jews. Because why? That was all done deliberately. Because they wanted to break your spirit. And why did they want to break your spirit? That you shouldn't resist. So they made you feel like animals. Right in the first days. Because we managed to get away from the house, from the flat. At least you worked for the Germans. While you were working, you felt safer. And I was going one morning to work, and I had to walk a long distance. And I was about 2 blocks away from where we lived. And I walk in the gutters, the stars of David. And I see from across the road 2 men crossing the road towards me. And before I knew what was happening, I was terribly beaten up. Kicking me and hitting me and kicking me. And I fell to the ground, all bloody, and I thought I broke my nose. And then something happened. And it's funny that through such an experience, actually it saved my life. Now how did this happen? Because while there, a Christian woman, an elderly lady, and she started shouting at those 2 men, hooligans, hooligans. don't you start with your own size? He is only a little boy. They were ashamed and they left me. And then all of a sudden, the man that's conducting the traffic on the corner came up to me and he lifted me up and he said to me very softly, because I was scared, "Are you okay?" So I got up and he gave me a handkerchief to wipe my face. Right? He said, "Are you okay?" I was scared to speak up. Right? And I went home. Now I want to explain to you that this incident made me think. And I said before, it saved my life. Because it made me think, if there were two people that stood up for me, that elderly lady and the trafficker, there must be other Christians that were going to help you. So not all of them are bad. Not all are Latvians and not all are Germans. There must be others. And I decided that I'm not going to sit there in a flat. I'm not going to sit wait like a sitting duck till they come in and knock at the door or they take me away somewhere else. And I said, I'm going to try to hide myself. I thought I'll leave our flat and I go try to hide in town. You know, town is a big place. My mother was very against it. And she said to me, "You must not do it. You'll be caught. You will be caught. You will not last very long." But I did it. And the next morning, I got up and I went out early in the morning. I took off the Stars of David. And it was a very funny experience all of a sudden. I'm not supposed to do it. And I went to town and I won't be there. Okay. And I managed to hide for about a week. You see, I was lucky. It was summer. It was July in Latvia. It's very nice, very beautiful. So because it was summer, you could sleep anywhere at night, even in the outside, in the park or anywhere. And I managed to get some food, and a week passed. And all of a sudden, I felt quite good. I said, "I'll manage," because I did not. In those days, you can see, I don't look Jewish. In those days, I looked less Jewish. I looked like a Latvian little boy, with blue eyes, red cheeks, you know, and I spoke the language. I spoke the language very well. I still do today, you know. So a week passed. Then one day, I walk in the main. Before me, I see there are spot checks. They're checking your papers. The Gestapo. You know what the Gestapo is? The Gestapo. The secret police, but in civilian clothes. You're very suspected. Right before you, they're holding you up and they want to see your passport. And those that the passport papers are not in order, they put you to the left. And a number of people are already standing there on the left. And it comes my turn near. Now, can you imagine how I felt? I haven't got any papers. My papers, it says I'm Jewish. And I knew what will happen to me when they catch me. You know, if you are a man, they know right away that you are Jewish. Do you understand? You do. A woman can get away. A man can't get away. I couldn't get away. So imagine the feeling and say, no, but this is the end. Imagine what sort of a desert we are going to die. And then a miracle happened. I want to tell you something. While in the 4 years that I was under the Nazis or the Germans, lots of miracles happened. This is one of them. So, as a company were taken aside, a gun, and obviously they turned around and shot him. But because of that, it created a big calamity, and everybody started running in different directions, including me. Before that, I heard them saying, that bloody Jew, that was the man that shot the Gestapo. So indirectly, he saved my life. But I've become very demoralized. Before, you remember, I was confident. I walked, I didn't worry very much. Now I've become terribly demoralized. If a thing like this can happen, it can catch you anytime. And the next day, I was sitting in one of the parks on a bench like this, and desperate. I didn't know what am I going to do now? I see a man coming, big, tall. I must tell you that Latvia is a little country here between Finland and Russia, and the other side is Sweden. Now you get a better idea. I was sure that this tall man was one of the Gestapo men I saw the day before. So I said, my God, I hope he's not. And he comes right towards me, and he looks at me, and he sits down next to me on the bench. I was sitting like this. So he started talking to me like nothing happened in Latvian. And then he came out with something. What they do to the Jews. How they kill the Jews. Because the Jews, that's what he said, are also people. I didn't say a word. I thought that this may be a trick, I kept quiet. So he looks at me. He said to me, why aren't you at school? It's 14. It's in the morning, sitting there on the bench. So I knew right away he's not who I thought he was, you see. He was somebody else. So something came out of my mouth, and the minute I said it, I was already sorry. I said to him, I'm a Jew. So he looks down at me and said, you're a Jew. You don't look like one. I said, I'm a Jew. He says to me, come, let's go. Now you know what that meant, come, let's go? You don't know who he is. He could be what he really was, which I'm coming to, or he could be the Gestapo, just to catch you. And I admitted that I'm Jewish. So I got up, I was all shaking, and he looks at me, and he said, come, let's go. I said to him, I can't go. I said, why? I can't leave I left my parents behind. So he said, don't be silly. Your parents can't help you. I can help you. And I went with him. And the bus comes, and the bus is right on the other side of the bus. and I already knew that he is not a Gestapo man, you know. He said to me, don't be afraid. I am a 7 days Adventist. Now you know what a 7 days Adventist are, you know? They are a Christian sect that observing the Saturday. So, you know, so somehow his attitude was different. Little wooden house, and I walk inside, and his wife comes out. She looks at him. Who am I? She said, they both went into the kitchen. So I hear them talking, and she started to shout at him. I say, how could you have done such a thing? He's a Jew. How can you endanger our children? He's only a stranger. So I hear him saying, I couldn't have done anything else. I had to save him. And afterwards I came. His name was Karl. The Latvian name was Dumi. And I was in their house for quite some time. And because I managed to escape all the terrible things that happened in those days. I think, can I have a little break? I'll have something to drink. Okay, I want to be, as I explained, lucky by meeting Karl. Because the time I was there in hiding water, I escaped all the terrible things that happened in the rest of Riga with the Jewish people, with the Jews, you know. And what happened? First of all, while I was to say, after being there a couple of months, I became very restless. And I was worried about my mother and my father, because I knew that they will think I'm dead. Once I disappeared, and I was sure that they thought I was dead. So I managed to send a message to them that I'm alive. But I couldn't tell them where I was. You understand? You'd be very careful. But they knew I was alive. So what happened to my mother and my father? The German established a ghetto in Riga like in all the other towns. Now you know what a ghetto is? Can you describe what do you think is a ghetto? Have you any idea? No. I'll tell you. They take the worst part of a town, like in Riga, like in Germans they'll take Jeppe, or Troilo, or Malva. Right? That's a bit how you can understand better, right? And they surround it with barbed wire. And they put all the Jews in a ghetto. In Riga were about 25,000 people that put into that ghetto. Now the ghetto was all premeditated. Is that the right word? Premeditated. Because they had different plans. Everything was already decided in advance what they're going to do. So, after a couple of months, they took one morning everybody out of the ghetto. They came with lots of police and volunteers, and they took them out, marched into one of the forests. It was a forest there called the Rumbuja in Riga. And there it was in the middle of winter, and it was slippery. It was ice and snow. And those that fell, they shot them on the way, on the spot. And those that reached the forest, they were big graves dug out. They took them into the forest. They had to line up along. I want to tell you how these people died. Right? They had to undress and sort out their clothes with proper thoroughness. They didn't want to waste their clothes. So they had to put, say, shoes in one heap, tops, different heaps, blouses, skirts, suits, trousers, dozens of different heaps. And when this was done, the police, the soldiers, were lying at the back, and they shot them, and they fell into the graves. That's how they died. In Riga and this forest, 25,000 people died. My father and all my relations, right? Actually, I'm the only survivor, believe it or not, of quite a big family. But when I think about it now, please, the message, because I imagine my parents, well, apparently God was listening, because here I'm sitting, right? Let's survive. Now, was cut. As I told you before, his wife was objecting. She was scared, and I don't blame her. And so one day I had to leave. Once the Germans already liquidated the ghetto, they established a labor camp for their carpenters, locksmiths, electricians. That's what they used for a Wehrmacht, for the army, you know. So I managed to get into the labor camp. And we worked for the German army units. And we managed to survive. It was terrible, labor camp. But somehow we managed to survive. So what happened one day? Everybody was excited. What the news? The Russians are here. The Russians came. You remember the Russians were advancing all the time. In 1942, they were already advancing and pushed the Germans backwards all the time. And here, it was 1943, they were outside Riga. And we thought, well, it won't take long now. We'll manage to survive. We'll be the artillery and fighting. The Russians different ideas. They didn't want us to be free then. That was the worst thing. The Jews, and they put us on a big boat, which called the Bremerhaven, was an enormously big boat, and we were going to be shipped to Germany. Now can you imagine, I want you to understand the feelings. Here, we're getting on the boat, and you have a look and you see that Riga there. All the places, the town you grew up in, all the places. And the Russians are already across the river, and they take you the last minute. You thought you're free, and you take you away. And what we experienced after that was 10 times worse than what happened to us before. Because they sent us to concentration camp. This concentration camp they sent us was called Stutthof. It's not Auschwitz. It was people know about Auschwitz. But it was a terrible camp. And you couldn't survive there very long. It was too terrible. There were 100,000 people present in that camp. Can you imagine the size of it? 100,000 people. When we had to stand outside when we came back from work, before they let us into the barracks. And so we stood outside in the freezing cold. I remember like 1,000 people standing outside. And what did we do? We stood next to each other. And how can I explain? We practically hugged each other to keep warm. Can you imagine 1,000 people standing like this, close together, just to keep warm? And then it took you into the barracks. We slept on one bank, 3 people on one bank. There were 2 stories, one at the bottom, one at the top. 3 people, 2 this way. You heard the shouting, raus, raus, mach schnell, mach raus. 6 o'clock in the bitterly cold. And you had to line up. You had to line up for a roll, is it the roll call? Eh? Yeah. Roll call. Was Alsatians. Their favorite dogs were the Alsatians. And they walked past and you had to stand stiff. Maybe thousands of people, maybe like a half a one slight move, the dogs went for it. They bit you, they snipped you, the right way. Yeah? So what happened? People couldn't move. Some of them standing there froze to death. And when we left the roll call, the people were, dead bodies were lying there in the snow, in the cold. I'll give you an example of what it was. The work was terrible. There was no mercy. If you couldn't continue working,